Pretend you're our father. Please, just for 5 minutes. He's coming. Silas froze, his teacup halfway to his lips. He was used to being interrupted by board members and lawyers, but not by 3 identical girls shivering behind his velvet curtains. Their hair was tangled with garden briars, and their breaths came in jagged, terrified gasps. Before Silas could ask who he was, the heavy iron knocker on his front door echoed through the house like a gunshot. The smallest girl grabbed his hand, her fingers cold as ice. "Please," she whispered, "if they take us back, we won't get another chance to run." Welcome to the channel. This story explores what happens when a man who has everything is asked to protect 3 children who have nothing but a lie to keep them safe. If you're ready for a journey of secrets and second chances, please like the video and subscribe to help us grow. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Now, as the heavy thud of boots approached the dining hall, Silas looked at the 3 trembling faces and made a choice that would dismantle his carefully built life. The girls couldn't have been older than 9. Triplets, clearly. Same sharp cheekbones, same storm-gray eyes, same freckles scattered across their noses like thrown paint. But their expressions were entirely different. The tallest stood with her chin raised, defiant, despite the mud caking her dress. The middle one kept glancing toward the window, calculating. The smallest, the one clutching his hand, looked at him with raw, desperate hope. Silas set down his tea. "Get behind the dining table. Stay quiet." They moved like smoke, once silent and quick. He heard his housekeeper's footsteps in the hall, then her voice, tight with disapproval. "Sir, there's a Mr. Cormac Payne here to see you. He says it's urgent." Silas straightened his collar. He'd built Hartwell Industrial from a failing steel mill into a conglomerate worth $200 million. He'd negotiated with union leaders and senators, outmaneuvered hostile takeovers, survived 3 assassination attempts by business rivals. He could handle one unexpected visitor. "Show him in, Mrs. Bellamy." The man who entered made Silas revise his confidence. Cormac Payne was broad-shouldered and expensively dressed, but there was something wrong about him. His smile was too practiced, his eyes too still. He scanned the room with the precision of someone cataloging assets. "Mr. Hartwell, I apologize for the intrusion." His voice was smooth as oil on water. "I'm searching for 3 children who ran away from my care. They're disturbed, I'm afraid, prone to wild stories and theft. You haven't seen them, have you?" Silas heard the smallest girl's breathing hitch behind the table. He kept his face neutral. "This is a private estate, Mr. Payne. Trespassers are rare." "Of course." Payne's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Still, they're resourceful little things. Their mother died 6 months ago, poor woman. Left them to me, their legal guardian. I run a children's home upstate, very reputable. But grief makes children do strange things." "Strange how?" "They claim I'm unkind. They tell elaborate lies about their living conditions." Payne moved closer, his hand resting on the back of Silas's chair. "Between you and me, Mr. Hartwell, they need discipline, structure. Their mother coddled them, filled their heads with fantasies. Now they can barely separate truth from fiction." Silas had built his fortune by reading people. He saw the way Payne's knuckles were scarred, the fresh scratch on his neck, the dust on his shoes that matched the dirt on the girl's feet. He saw the hunger in Payne's eyes when he looked around the dining room, mentally pricing the silverware. "I'll have my groundskeeper Check the property, Silas said. If I find them, I'll send word. I'd prefer to search myself. This is my home, Mr. Payne. I don't allow strangers to wander freely. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Payne's smile vanished. Those children belong to me. The courts agreed. If you're harboring them, you're breaking the law. Silas stood. At 6'3", he had 2 inches on Payne. And if you're on my property making accusations, you're trespassing. Mrs. Bellamy will show you out. For a moment, he thought Payne might refuse. The man's hand twitched toward his coat pocket, and Silas saw the outline of something metallic. Then Payne laughed, the sound like breaking glass. You're a businessman, Mr. Hartwell. I understand that. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Those girls, there's a trust fund. Their mother was wealthy once. Old railroad money. The fund matures when they turn 18. But as their guardian, I manage it until then. $10,000 a year per child for administrative fees. Perfectly legal. There it was. Silas had suspected as much. Get out. Think about what I'm offering. $30,000 a year, Mr. Hartwell. All you have to do is… I said get out. Payne's mask slipped completely. His face went red, and his voice dropped to a snarl. You'll regret this. I have lawyers. I have judges. Those girls will be back where they belong by week's end, and you'll be answering questions about kidnapping. Mrs. Bellamy appeared in the doorway, her expression stony. She was 63, built like a fireplace, and had once thrown a door-to-door salesman down the front steps for being rude. She stepped aside, making the exit clear. Payne straightened his coat. This isn't over. Yes, Silas said quietly. It is. They listened to the front door slam, then the sound of a motorcar engine sputtering to life. Silas waited until the growl faded down the long driveway before speaking. You can come out now. The girls emerged like animals from a burrow. Cautious, not ready to bolt. The tallest spoke first. Thank you for not telling. Who are you? I'm Greer. That's Willa. She pointed to the middle girl. And that's Hattie. The smallest one, still pale. Your real names? Greer hesitated, then nodded. Our mother named us after her grandmother and great-aunts. She said we should carry their strength. Silas sat down heavily. His tea had gone cold. Tell me the truth. All of it. So they did. Their mother, Charlotte Finch, had been the last heir of the Finch Railroad fortune. She'd married young, badly, to a man who drained her accounts and disappeared when the girls were 2. She'd moved them to a small town upstate, lived quietly on what remained of the money, and invested the rest into a trust the girls couldn't touch until adulthood. When she got sick, pneumonia that turned to sepsis, she'd made arrangements. A distant cousin, twice removed, had agreed to take them in. But the cousin died in a train derailment 3 weeks after Charlotte's funeral, and the court had awarded guardianship to Cormac Payne. He ran a home for orphans, Willa said, her voice flat. 23 children, all crammed into a farmhouse meant for 6. We slept 4 to a bed. Breakfast was watered-down porridge. Dinner was the same. He took the money meant for our care and spent it on himself, Greer added. New motor car, new suits. He started bringing strangers to the house, showing us off like livestock, talking about adoption fees. We weren't the only ones he hurt, Hattie whispered. There was a boy, Thomas. He tried to run away. Mr. Payne locked him in the cellar for 3 days with no food. Silas felt something cold settle in his chest. What happened to Thomas? He's still there. Everyone is. Greer's jaw tightened. We were going to take them all, but they were too scared. So we ran alone. How did you get here? We walked, Willa said. 12 miles through the woods. We found your house because there were lights on. 12 miles. Silas looked at their torn dresses, their blistered feet. He thought about the 3 assassination attempts he'd survived, the fights he'd won through lawyers and ledgers and leverage. He'd never once thought about what it took for children to walk 12 miles through darkness, running from a monster. Mrs. Bellamy appeared in the doorway. "Sir, should I prepare rooms?" Silas met her eyes. She'd been with him for 15 years, and since before his wife died in childbirth, along with their daughter. She knew his moods, his silences, the way grief had carved him hollow. She was asking him a different question. "Are you ready for this?" He looked at the 3 girls, small and fierce and terrified. "Yes. 3 rooms, and draw them baths. Find something for them to wear. Check the attic. My wife kept some things." Mrs. Bellamy nodded and disappeared. The girls stood frozen, as if waiting for the permission to dissolve. "You can stay tonight," Silas said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." Greer's defiance cracked. "You mean you'll send us back?" "I mean, I'll find another solution." "There isn't one." Willa's voice was bitter, beyond her years. "The courts gave him custody. Our mother's family is gone. We have nobody." Hattie stepped forward. Her hand found his again, fingers still ice-cold. "You could say you're our father. We look enough alike. Same dark hair, same eyes. If you said it, people would believe you." Silas pulled his hand back gently. "That's fraud, perjury. I could go to prison." "But you won't," Greer said. "You're rich. Rich people don't go to prison." The assessment was so blunt, so accurate, that Silas almost laughed. Almost. Instead he stood and walked to the window. His estate sprawled across 40 acres of manicured lawns and old-growth forest. He owned 3 factories, 2 shipping companies, a railroad line, and enough stock to influence elections. He'd built everything from nothing, clawed his way up from a blacksmith's apprentice to the richest man in the state, and he'd been utterly alone for 8 years. "Go with Mrs. Bellamy," he said without turning around. "We'll talk in the morning." He heard them leave, their footsteps soft on the carpet. When the door closed, he pressed his forehead against the cold glass and let himself remember. Her name had been Anne. She'd been a teacher, patient and kind, with a laugh that filled rooms. She'd seen something in him beyond the money, beyond the reputation. She'd made him believe he could be something other than ruthless. Their daughter had been stillborn. Anne had bled out in the same hour. The doctors said there was nothing they could do, but Silas had seen their hesitation, the way they'd prioritized the baby over the mother because he'd demanded it. He'd killed her with his own desperation for an heir. Since then, he'd filled the silence with work, 18-hour days, acquisitions and mergers, building an empire with no one to inherit it. Behind him, the door opened quietly. "Mrs. Bellamy, they're asking if you'll come say goodnight, sir." "Why would they want that?" "Because they're children, Mr. Hartwell, and children need someone to tuck them in." He followed her upstairs to the guest wing. The 3 rooms glowed with lamplight. The girls had bathed and changed into mismatched nightgowns, Anne's old things, pulled from trunks that hadn't been opened in years. They looked smaller now, scrubbed clean, their wet hair combed out. Greer sat on her bed with a book she'd found somewhere, pretending to read. Willa stood at the window, watching the dark woods beyond the lawn. Hattie was already under the covers, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had belonged to Anne. "Comfortable?" Silas asked awkwardly. It's the softest bed I've ever touched, Hattie said. Can I keep the rabbit? Yes. Will you read to us? Greer held up the book. Our mother used to read to us every night. Poetry mostly. Silas took the book. Robert Frost, Anne's favorite. He sat in the chair between the beds and opened to a random page. His voice felt rusty, but he read anyway. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. By the time he finished, Hattie was asleep. Willa had stopped watching the woods. Even Greer's eyes were heavy. Mr. Hartwell, Greer whispered. Yes? Do you think we're bad? For lying to you? For running? No. Mr. Payne says we're ungrateful, that we should be thankful he took us in at all. Silas closed the book carefully. Mr. Payne is wrong about many things. Get some sleep. He turned off the lamps and left the doors cracked open, the way Anne used to insist when she talked about the daughter they'd have. In the hallway, Mrs. Bellamy was waiting. What will you do, sir? I don't know yet. That man will be back, with lawyers, like he said. Let him come. And the girls? Silas looked back at the three doors, the thin strips of light escaping into the dark hall. I won't send them back to that place. Mrs. Bellamy smiled. A rare thing. Good. I already told Cook to prepare extra for breakfast. Those children are half-starved. Payne returned at dawn, with a sheriff and a lawyer. Silas met them in the drawing room, freshly shaved and dressed for battle in his best suit. The lawyer was a weasel-faced man named Pritchard, who did most of the talking. Mr. Hartwell, my client has legal custody of the Finch children. Harboring them constitutes kidnapping under state law. The girls came to me seeking refuge, Silas said. I'm providing temporary shelter while investigating the conditions of Mr. Payne's home. Investigating? Payne laughed. On whose authority? Mine? Silas pulled a document from his desk. I've filed a petition with the court to review the guardianship arrangement. Given your financial interest in the girls' trust fund, I believe there's a conflict of interest. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. You have no standing. You're not family. I'm a concerned citizen, with resources to ensure these children are treated fairly. This is absurd, Payne said, his face reddening. Sheriff, I'll arrest him. The sheriff, a middle-aged man named Dockery, who'd been elected with campaign donations from Hartwell Industrial, shifted uncomfortably. Now, Mr. Payne, I can't just arrest people without cause. He's admitted to harboring them. Temporarily, Silas corrected, while awaiting court review. Pritchard pulled the sheriff aside for a whispered conversation. Silas watched Payne, who was staring at the ceiling with barely contained rage. The chandelier above them was worth $5,000. The painting on the wall, $12,000. Payne's eyes moved from piece to piece, calculating, coveting. This is a waste of time, Payne said finally. Those girls are mine by law. Enjoy your court petition, Hartwell. By the time it's heard, I'll have them back where they belong. After they left, and Silas called his personal attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Ruth Calloway, who'd never lost a case. Can we delay the custody review? He asked. For how long? Long enough to find evidence of abuse. Ruth was silent for a moment. Silas, if you're doing this out of some misguided sense of guilt, I'm doing this because it's right. Right doesn't always win in court. You know that. Then we'll make it win. He spent the next 3 days turning his home into a fortress. He hired private investigators to examine Payne's orphanage, interview former residents, track his spending. He met with judges he donated to over the years, calling in favors. He prepared affidavits and witness statements, and he spent time with the girls. They were strange creatures to him at first, loud at breakfast, constantly moving, asking endless questions. Greer challenged everything he said, testing his patience. Willa observed quietly, cataloguing his habits like she was preparing for an exam. Hattie followed him everywhere, clutching the rabbit, asking if he'd read to them again. On the fourth night, Hattie had a nightmare. Silas heard her screaming from down the hall and ran, his heart pounding. She was thrashing in the bed, crying for her mother, begging someone to stop. He sat beside her and took her hand. "You're safe. I'm here." She woke gasping, her face soaked with tears. "He locked us in the cellar. We were there for hours." "Payne?" She nodded. "He said we were ungrateful, that we needed to learn discipline." Silas felt rage bloom in his chest, hot and terrible. He'd felt this once before, when a factory owner had tried to sabotage his steel mill by bribing his workers. He'd crushed the man financially, systematically dismantled his business, left him bankrupt. But this was different. This wasn't business. "He won't touch you again," Silas said. "I promise." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let him." Hattie studied his face in the lamplight. "Do you mean that?" "Yes." She climbed into his lap, small and warm, and fell asleep against his shoulder. Silas sat there until morning, holding her, listening to her breathe. When sunlight crept through the curtains, he realized his shirt was damp with her tears, and his own. Ruth called on the 6th day with bad news. The judge denied the emergency review. Payne's lawyer argued that you have no legal standing, and the judge agreed. "Unless you can prove imminent danger, the custody arrangement stands. We have evidence of neglect, hearsay from the children, and one former resident who's unreliable. Payne's lawyer will tear it apart. We need something concrete." Silas hung up and stared at the phone. He'd fought hostile takeovers, labor strikes, economic collapses. He'd never felt this powerless. That night at dinner, the girls were subdued. They'd heard him on the phone, understood enough to know the news was bad. "You tried," Greer said quietly. "Thank you for that. This isn't over." "Yes, it is." She pushed her food around her plate. "We always knew it would end this way." "You don't know that." "We do." Willa's voice was flat. "We're just kids. Nobody listens to kids." Silas looked at their faces, resigned, defeated, already preparing to go back. He thought about the cellar, the watered-down porridge, the boy locked in the dark. He thought about Anne, about the daughter who never drew breath, about all the ways he'd failed the people he was supposed to protect. "What if I claimed you?" he said suddenly. 3 heads snapped up. "What?" Greer whispered. "What if I said I was your father, your real father?" "You mean lie?" Willa's eyes widened. "I mean give you my name, legally adopt you." Hattie's hands trembled. "Can you do that?" "I can try." "But Mr. Payne has custody," Greer said. "The court's already decided." "Courts can be wrong. If I petition for adoption, claim there was a mistake in the original custody arrangement, we might have a chance." Ruth would hate this plan. It was risky, potentially criminal, built on a foundation of fraud. But Silas had spent 8 years alone in this enormous house, a building wealth with no purpose, filling the void where his family should have been. "You'd do that," Greer's voice cracked. "For us?" "Yes." "Why?" Silas met her eyes. "Because you deserve better, and because this house has been empty long enough." The legal battle was brutal. Payne fought back with everything he had, lawyers, judges, private investigators of his own. He claimed Silas was manufacturing evidence, manipulating the girls, using his wealth to pervert justice. Some of it was true. Silas did use his wealth. He hired the best lawyers in the state. He made donations to the right campaigns. He called in favors from senators and judges. He played the game the way he'd always played it, ruthlessly, strategically, without mercy. But he also told the truth about the conditions at Payne's orphanage, and about the missing funds from the trust, about the children locked in cellars and starved for discipline. The court hearings lasted 3 months. Silas attended every one, the girls beside him in new dresses that Mrs. Bellamy had commissioned. They testified about their treatment, their voices small but steady. Greer spoke with fierce clarity. Willa provided dates and details. Hattie cried when describing the cellar, but she didn't break. Payne's lawyer tried to paint them as liars, as children manipulated by a rich man seeking redemption. But the evidence was mounting. Former residents came forward. Staff members testified about Payne's cruelty. Financial records showed him embezzling from the trust funds of multiple children. The day the judge ruled, Silas sat in the courtroom with his hands clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. In the matter of Finch guardianship, the judge said, her voice echoing through the chamber, the court finds substantial evidence of abuse and financial misconduct by the current guardian, Mr. Cormac Payne. Custody is hereby revoked, effective immediately. Payne shot to his feet, shouting, but the bailiffs were already moving toward him. The financial crimes alone would put him in prison for years. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court approves the petition for adoption filed by Mr. Silas Hartwell, subject to a 6-month probationary period to ensure the placement is in the best interests of the children. Silas couldn't breathe. The girls were staring at him, eyes wide. Mr. Hartwell, the judge said, and he heard something almost like warmth in her voice. Don't make me regret this. I won't. Not, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs popped. Someone shoved a microphone in his face, asking why he'd taken on 3 orphans, what his plans were, whether this was a publicity stunt. Silas ignored them all. He looked down at Greer, Willa, and Hattie, his daughters now, at least temporarily. Let's go home, he said. The 6-month probation period was harder than the legal battle. The girls had nightmares. They hoarded food in their rooms, unable to believe there would always be breakfast. They flinched at raised voices. Hattie couldn't sleep without checking that the doors were unlocked. Silas hired a doctor who specialized in childhood trauma. The sessions were painful, progress measured in inches. But slowly, things changed. Greer stopped testing him, stopped waiting for him to send them away. She started bringing him books, asking his opinion, arguing with him about philosophy and politics. Willa began to relax. She laughed at dinner. She planted a garden in the courtyard, grew vegetables she wouldn't have to hoard. Hattie called him father for the first time 3 months in, so casually he almost missed it. Father, can you read to us tonight? He'd looked up from his newspaper, stunned. She was standing in the doorway with the rabbit under one arm and a poetry book under the other, completely unaware she'd just rewired his entire world. Of course, he'd managed. But the hardest part wasn't the trauma. It was learning to be a father. He made mistakes. He was too strict about table manners, too rigid about schedules. He didn't understand why they needed to talk about their feelings, why homework took so long, why they cried over things that seemed small to him. Mrs. Bellamy became their interpreter. They need consistency, sir, not perfection. They need to know you'll be there, even when you mess up. He messed up often. He forgot Willa's recital and arrived an hour late, earning her cold silence for days. He criticized Greer's essay too harshly, making her cry. He didn't notice that Hattie was being bullied at school until she stopped wanting to go. But he also learned. He apologized when he was wrong. He sat through ballet recitals and school plays and endless conversations about things he didn't understand. He taught Greer to play chess. He helped Willa with her garden. He read to Hattie every single night, no matter how late he worked. And slowly, the house stopped being empty. There were voices in the halls, laughter at breakfast, and arguments over who got to sit by the window, muddy footprints on the carpet, books left open on tables, the smell of Willa's cooking experiments drifting from the kitchen. The night before the final custody hearing, Silas couldn't sleep. He sat in his study with a glass of whiskey, staring at the adoption papers Ruth had prepared. Nervous, Mrs. Bellamy appeared in the doorway with tea. Terrified. Why? What if I can't do this? What if I fail them the way I failed? He couldn't finish. Mrs. Bellamy sat down across from him. You're not the same man you were 8 years ago, sir. That man was drowning in grief, making desperate choices. This man is choosing to love 3 children who need him. There's a difference. What if it's not enough? Love is never perfect, but it's always enough if you keep trying. The custody hearing was brief. The court-appointed social worker gave a glowing report. The girls had thrived. Better grades, better health, clear signs of attachment and stability. The judge looked at Silas over her glasses. Mr. Hartwell, are you prepared to be a father to these children? Not as a project or an obligation, but as a permanent commitment? He thought about Greer's fierce intelligence, the way she challenged him to be better, about Willa's quiet strength, her garden growing wild and beautiful in the courtyard, about Hattie's nightmares, less frequent now, but still there, and the way she trusted him to chase them away. Yes, Your Honor. Then the adoption is finalized. Greer, Willa, and Hattie Finch are now legally Greer, Willa, and Hattie Hartwell. The girls erupted in tears and laughter. Hattie threw herself into his arms. Willa grabbed his hand. Greer tried to maintain her composure, but failed spectacularly, crying into his shoulder while he held all 3 of them and felt his own tears fall. Later at home, they celebrated with cake that Willa had baked herself, lopsided and over-frosted and perfect. They ate in the garden she'd planted, surrounded by tomatoes and beans and roses. Father, Greer said suddenly, can we go back to the orphanage? Silas's stomach dropped. Why? The other children. We left them there. Now that Mr. Payne is gone, someone else is running it, but you want to help them. We could, couldn't we? You have money, influence. We could make sure it's better. Silas looked at his daughters. Brilliant, compassionate, fierce. He'd given them safety, but they wanted to give others the same. Yes, he said, we could. Reforming the orphanage took 2 years. Silas bought the building, fired the incompetent staff Payne had left behind, and hired people who actually cared. He renovated rooms, hired teachers, established trust funds for each child. The girls visited every week, bringing books and toys and stories. They knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to be afraid, to believe no one cared. They made sure none of the children felt that way again. Thomas, the boy who'd been locked in the cellar, was the first one they helped. Silas found him a foster family, paid for his education, stayed in touch until the boy graduated university with honors. There were others. 23 children became 23 chances. Some were adopted. Some aged out and moved on. But all of them knew that Greer, Willa, and Hattie Hartwell had fought for them, and that their father had made it possible. On the girl's 18th birthday, Silas held a party that filled the house with music and laughter. The orphanage children came, along with friends from school, teachers, even Ruth Calloway, who'd made the adoption possible. Greer gave a speech about found families and second chances that made everyone cry. Willa unveiled her scholarship fund for orphans pursuing agriculture. Hattie announced she was studying to be a children's advocate. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Silas sat in the garden with his daughters. They were young women now, confident, educated, ready to change the world. "We never said thank you," Greer said quietly, "for that first night, for believing us. You did say thank you, every day since. We disrupted your entire life," Willa pointed out. "You saved it," Silas corrected. "I was a ghost, living in an empty house. You made me human again." Hattie leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, adopting us?" Silas thought about the legal battles, the sleepless nights, the moments he doubted himself. He thought about graduations and recitals and arguments and laughter. He thought about his wife and the daughter he'd lost and the 3 daughters he'd found. "Not for a single second," he said. Years later, when Silas was old and grey and surrounded by grandchildren who ran through the halls the way their mothers once had, people would ask him about his greatest accomplishment. He never mentioned Hartwell Industrial, or the fortune he'd built, or the empire that bore his name. He talked about 3 girls shivering behind curtains, and the choice he'd made to protect them. He talked about how families aren't always born from blood, but sometimes from the desperate need to save each other. And he talked about how the best things in life are the ones you never planned for, the ones that appear in your dining room, terrified and brave, and ask you to be someone better than you thought you could be. Silas and the girls finally found their peace, proving that some families aren't born. They're chosen in the moments that matter most. If this story touched you, please hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. See you in the next story.